I want to meet the Hells Angels. The words dropped out of the boy's mouth and the whole hospital room went dead quiet. His mother stopped breathing. The wish coordinator's pen froze above her clipboard. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped steady and cruel, counting out the days he had left. 18 years old. Terminal. Maybe a week, the doctor said. And this was the last thing Logan Whitaker wanted before he died. Not a trip, not a celebrity, not one more Christmas. He wanted the most feared men in America to walk through that door. And nobody in that room understood why. Before we go one step further, if you believe a dying boy deserves the truth about his own father, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because the ending of this one will stay with you. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. I read every single one and I love seeing just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Emily Whitaker had heard her son say a lot of hard things in the last 3 months. She'd heard him say, "I'm scared, Mom." She'd heard him say, "Why me at 2 a.m" when he thought she was asleep in the plastic chair by the window. She'd heard him whisper on the worst night of all, "If it's my time, I don't want you to be alone." She had absorbed each of those sentences the way a body absorbs a punch on the inside where nobody could see the bruise. But she was not ready for this one. "Say that again, baby," she said. Her voice came out thin. "I don't think I heard you right." Logan turned his head against the pillow. He was so light now. That was the thing that still undid her, how the disease had taken the boy who used to fill a doorway, who used to thunder down the stairs 2 at a time in his cleats, and folded him down into this. His cheekbones stood out sharp. His hands, once big enough to palm a basketball, lay open on the blanket, like something set down and forgotten. But his eyes hadn't changed. His eyes were still his father's. "You heard me," Logan said. "The Hells Angels. That's my wish." The wish coordinator, a kind, round-faced woman named Deborah, who had been doing this job for 11 years and thought she'd heard everything, cleared her throat. "Logan, honey, I want to make sure I understand," she said carefully. "You mean like a motorcycle experience? We can absolutely arrange a ride-along. There are wonderful clubs that do charity rides for kids, veterans groups. They wear the leather. They'd be thrilled to." "No," Logan's voice was quiet, but it did not bend. "I mean the Hells Angels. The real ones. The Billings chapter." Deborah's smile stayed on her face, but stopped meaning anything. "Sweetheart," she said, "I don't know that that's something the foundation can... I know what people say about them." Logan pushed himself up an inch against the pillows, and Emily saw the effort it cost him, saw the way his whole chest had to fight for it. "I know. Criminals, outlaws, drugs, whatever. I've heard it all. I've been hearing it my whole life." He looked at his mother when he said that last part. Looked right at her. "My whole life." Emily felt the floor tilt. "Baby," she said. "Let's not, Mom." He said it soft. He said it the way you say a word you've been holding on to. "I need to know if my dad was really a bad man." And there it was, 12 years. 12 years she had spent building a wall brick by careful brick around the subject of Daniel Whitaker. 12 years of your dad loved you and nothing more. 12 years of putting the toolbox up on the high shelf in the garage where a little boy couldn't reach it. 12 years of changing the subject of the tight smile of, "We don't need to talk about that." She had gotten so good at it that she almost believed the wall was the whole house. And her dying son had just walked up and put his hand flat against it. Deborah, God bless her, understood that something was happening in that room that was bigger than her clipboard. She stood quietly, gathered her things, and touched Emily's shoulder on the way out. "I'll give you 2 some time," she said. We'll figure something out, Emily. We always do." The door clicked shut. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The monitor beeped. Outside the window, Montana went on being enormous and indifferent the way it always had. "Why now?" Emily finally said. It wasn't really a question. "Logan, of all the things, why this?" "Because I'm out of time." He said it flatly, like a fact, like the weather. That was the thing that scared her worst of all, how he'd made peace with it while she was still at war. "I'm out of time, Mom, and there's one thing I don't know, just one. And you're the only person alive who could tell me, and you never will." "That's not fair." "No," he agreed, "it's not." She got up. She couldn't sit still with it. She went to the window and stood with her back to him, her arms wrapped around herself, and she looked out at the parking lot 4 floors down. "Your father," she started and stopped. Started again. "Your father was complicated. That's not a word, Mom. That's a door you close. She almost laughed. God, he was so much like Daniel, it hurt to look at him some days. Same way of cutting right to the middle of a thing. Same stubbornness. Same trick of saying something devastating in a completely calm voice. When did you? She turned around. How long have you been thinking about this? Logan reached over slowly, everything was slow now, to the little rolling table by his bed. Under the water pitcher, under the untouched jello, there was something. He slid it out. It was a photograph. Old soft at the corners, the color faded to that orange-brown that old photos go. Emily knew it before she saw it. She knew it the way you know your own name. A young man, maybe 25, leaning against a Harley-Davidson with his arms crossed and a grin on his face like he owned the whole sky. Dark hair, a leather cut over a white t-shirt, squinting into the sun. Daniel. God, Daniel at 25. Where did you get that? She whispered. The toolbox. That toolbox is in the garage, on the top shelf. You can't even... I asked Uncle Ray to bring it, Logan said, 3 weeks ago, before I got too weak. I told him not to tell you. He looked down at the photo in his own thin hands. There's a patch in there too. Leather. And this. Emily crossed the room. She sat down on the edge of the bed, and the effort of controlling her face was almost more than the effort of controlling her whole life had been. Logan listened to me. Was he one of them? Logan asked. He held the photo up so the leather cut was right there between them, that winged patch, that thing she'd spent 12 years pretending she'd never seen. Was my dad a Hell's Angel? And Emily Whitaker, who had lied by omission for 12 years, who had built the wall so high and so smooth, looked at her dying son and could not do it anymore. Yes, she said. The word came out of her like something being pulled from deep water. Yes, he was. She told him some of it that afternoon. Not all. She would never tell him all, not because she wanted to protect him anymore. He was past the point where protection meant anything, but because there were pieces even she didn't have. Pieces that had ridden away one night on the back of a motorcycle and never come home. But she told him this. She'd met Daniel when she was 19 in a diner outside Bozeman, where she waited tables. He came in with a group of them, all leather and noise, and every waitress in the place found something to do in the back. Every waitress but Emily, who was new and stuck with the section, and who was too tired and too broke to be scared of anybody. He'd tipped her $40 on a $12 breakfast, and he'd come back the next morning, and the morning after that. He wasn't what I thought he'd be, she told Logan. Her voice had gone somewhere far away. I thought he'd be all you know, mean, rough, and he was rough he could be. But he'd come into that diner and he'd read novels, big fat paperbacks with the spines all cracked. I asked him once why a man like him read so much, and he said, her breath caught. He said, because nobody expects it, and I like being more than what people expect. Logan was very still listening. He never told me at first what the club really was, Emily said. I found out slow, things I'd overhear, places he'd disappear to, money that came from nowhere. She looked at her hands. I told myself I didn't know. It's easy to not know something when you love somebody. You'd be amazed. Did he love you? Yes. No hesitation. That at least she was certain of. Yes, he loved me, and he loved you like Logan when you were born. That big, scary man cried so hard, and the nurse asked him if he needed to sit down. He held you like you were made of glass. He used to put you on the gas tank of that bike right in front of him when you were barely 2 and just idle up and down the driveway. Never went anywhere. Just let you feel it rumble. You'd laugh so hard, you'd get the hiccups. Logan closed his eyes. Something moved across his face, not pain this time. Something older than pain. I remember that, he said. You can't. You were a baby. I remember it, he said again, quieter. The rumble, his arms. I always thought I dreamed it. Emily had to look away. So what happened? Logan opened his eyes. If he loved us, if he wasn't just some monster, what happened to him? You always said he died, but you never said how. And that's the part, Mom. That's the part I can't die not knowing. Because everyone else, all the ones who knew him, they said one thing about him. Just one word, over and over. Don't. Trouble. Logan said it anyway. Your dad was trouble. Grandpa said it. The neighbors said it. Even you, Mom. Once, when I was 10 and I asked, you said your father was trouble, baby, and that's the last we're going to talk about it. Emily didn't remember saying it, but she knew she had. She'd said 1,000 versions of it. It was the safe word, the wall, the door that closed. I need to know if it is true, Logan said. Before I go, I need to know if the man in this picture was trouble, or if that's just what people say when they don't understand somebody. He set the photograph down on the blanket gently, like it was the most valuable thing in the room. To him, maybe it was. And there's only one place left that would tell me the truth. Not you, no offense, Mom, but you'd tell me whatever kept me from hurting. The people who really knew him, the ones who rode with him. Logan, that's my wish. That's my one wish. I want to meet the men who knew my father, and I want to ask them to their faces one question. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet and steady at the same time. Was he a good man? Emily Whitaker sat on the edge of her dying son's bed, and she understood that everything she had built for 12 years had just come down. All at once, silently. And she understood something worse. She wanted to know the answer too. The hospital said no. They said it kindly, and they said it in a conference room with a box of tissues on the table, but they said it. The Wish Foundation had a policy. The organization Logan was asking about was, and here the administrator chose his words the way a man chooses where to step in a minefield, associated with activities the foundation cannot in good conscience endorse or facilitate contact with. He's dying, Emily said. Mrs. Whitaker, I understand. You don't. She wasn't loud. She'd learned over 3 months of hospitals that loud got you nowhere. Loud got you a note in a file. So she said it quiet and level, and it landed harder for it. You don't understand. That boy has 40 things wrong with him, and one thing right, and the one thing right is that he still wants something. Do you really understand what that means when you have watched somebody stop wanting? He stopped asking for food. He stopped asking to see his friends. He stopped asking me to open the blinds. And now he's asking for one thing, and you're sitting there telling me about policy. The administrator looked at the box of tissues. We could arrange, he offered, a very nice veterans motorcycle group. They do wonderful work with. He'll know, Emily said. He'll know it's not real. He's dying, he's not stupid. If I send in a bunch of nice retired accountants in matching vests, he'll take one look and he'll know I lied to him. And then the last thing my son will ever know about me is that when it counted, when it was the one thing he ever asked me for, I gave him a fake. She stood up. I'm not going to do that, she said. I don't care what you people think of them. I'll find them myself. And that was the moment she would think about it later in the after. When there was an after, that was the moment Emily Whitaker decided to do the most frightening thing she had ever done in her life. She was going to walk into that clubhouse herself. And she didn't tell Logan. She didn't tell her brother Ray, who would have tried to stop her or worse, tried to come. She waited until visiting hours ended and the nurses shooed her out. And then instead of driving to the little rented apartment where she hadn't really slept in months, she drove the other way. North and east, out past the edge of the city, out to where the streetlights gave up and the dark got serious. She knew where the clubhouse was. Everyone in Billings sort of knew the way. Everyone knows the address they're not supposed to know. It was an old warehouse off a frontage road, low and long, and as she got closer, her hands started shaking on the wheel, and she had to talk to herself out loud to keep going. He's your son, she said to the windshield. He's your son, and this is what he wants, and you are going to do it. You are going to knock on that door. You are going to knock on that door. The rain started somewhere around the last turn. Fat, cold Montana rain, the kind that means business drumming on the roof of her old Camry, loud enough to drown out her own pep talk. When her headlights swept across the front of the building, her stomach dropped straight through the floorboards. The motorcycles. There must have been 40 of them lined up under a metal awning chrome catching the light, dripping in the rain. Big, beautiful, menacing in the way big, beautiful machines are when they belong to men you have been taught to fear your whole life. There were lights on inside, music low and thumping, shapes moving behind curtain windows. Emily sat in her car with the engine running for a long, long time. Then she thought about Logan's face. Was he a good man? And she turned off the engine and she got out into the rain and she walked toward the door. She didn't make it halfway. A voice came out of the dark, deep flat, absolutely without warmth, from a shape she hadn't even seen, a man leaning against the wall in the shadow of the awning where the light didn't reach. "Lady," the voice said, "you are a long way from wherever you're supposed to be." Emily froze. The man stepped forward, and she had to tilt her head back to see his face. He was enormous. Not fat-built slabbed a man, made out of the parts of two normal men. He had a black beard streaked with gray and a long scar that pulled at one eyebrow, and on his leather, cut over the heart, was the name patch Raven. Under it, another word she didn't let herself read. Her voice failed. She swallowed and tried again. "I'm looking for—" "You're not looking for anything you're going to find here." Raven's eyes went past her to the Camry, to the empty road, checking she realized whether she was alone or whether she was the front of something. "This is private property. You need to get back in your car and go home. Whatever you think this is, it's not. Please, go home." He said it the way you'd say it to a stray dog you didn't want to have to hurt. Not cruel. Final. He was already turning away and already writing her off, and Emily felt the whole thing slipping. The one wish, the one chance Logan's faced 12 years, all of it sliding away into that cold rain, and something in her broke open, and she did the only thing she could think of. She reached into her coat with shaking fingers and pulled out the photograph. "His name was Daniel," she called out, and her voice cracked on it. "Daniel Whitaker. He rode with you a long time ago. Please, please, my son is dying, and he just wants to know." Raven stopped. He didn't turn around. Not right away. He went very still, the way big men go still, like a mountain, deciding whether it's going to be a mountain today. Then slowly he turned back. "What did you say?" he said, and his voice was different now. Something had come into it. Not warmth, but something. "Daniel." She held out the photo, her hand trembling so badly the picture shook. The rain was hitting it, beating up on the old surface. "Daniel Whitaker. This is him. He was my husband. He rode with your club, and our son is in the hospital. He's got days left, and the only thing he's ever asked for is—" Raven crossed the distance between them in 3 steps. He took the photograph out of her hand gently. She noticed, even in her terror, a man that size being gentle with a piece of paper, and he held it up close to his face and looked at it in the awning light. And Emily watched a strange thing happen. She watched something move across that scarred, terrifying face that she would not have believed it capable of. His jaw tightened. His breath went out of him, slow through his nose. For just a second, half a second, the mountain wasn't a mountain. For half a second, he looked like a man who'd been shown a ghost. "Daniel," Raven said quietly. "You knew him." It wasn't a question. She could see it. "You knew my husband." Raven lowered the photo. He looked at her, and this time he really looked, took her in the cheap coat, soaked through the exhaustion, carved into her face the wedding ring she still wore 12 years later. "Lady," he said, "you got no idea what you just walked into. Then tell me." She was crying now. She hadn't decided to. It was just happening, the rain and the tears together. "Please, I don't care what he was. I don't care what any of you are. I'm not here for me. I'm here because my baby is dying, and he needs to know who his father was, and I have spent 12 years in not knowing, and I am so tired." Her voice gave out. Raven looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised her more than anything else that terrible night. He stepped to the side, and he held the heavy steel door open, and warm light and low music spilled out into the rain. "Come inside," he said, "before you catch your death out here." And Emily Whitaker, who had been afraid of these men her entire adult life, walked past the biggest, most frightening man she had ever seen through a steel door into the last place on earth she ever thought she'd stand. Inside it was warm. That was the first thing that broke her expectations, and it kept breaking them. She'd braced for a den for the pictures, the ones from the movies, all violence and menace. Instead, there was a long room with a scarred wooden bar down one side, worn couches, a pool table, a wall absolutely covered in photographs. Framed, dozens of them. Men on bikes, men at rallies, men with their arms around each other, men who'd clearly been at this a long time. Some of the frames had a strip of black cloth across the corner. The music was old. Creedence, something like that. Somebody had been cooking. The whole place smelled like coffee and chili. There were maybe 15 men in the room, and when the door opened, every single one of them looked up. And every single one of them stopped. because Emily wasn't supposed to be there, and they all knew it, and the room went from a warm rumble of noise to a silence so complete she could hear the rain on the roof. "Raven," said one of them, standing up slow. "What the hell?" "Everybody relax." Raven's voice filled the room with it being loud. He still had the photograph in his hand. "She's not a problem. She's not a cop. She's not a reporter. She's not anybody's ex." He held up the photo. "She's Daniel's." The word went through the room like a current. Daniel. She watched their faces change, the same thing that had happened to Raven, rippling out across 15 men. The younger ones, the ones who looked barely older than Logan, they just looked confused. The name meant nothing to them. But the older men, the gray beards, the ones with the miles on their faces. Something old and heavy moved behind their eyes, and one of them, a wiry old man on a bar stool, took off his cap and held it against his chest without seeming to know he'd done it. "Daniel's wife," the wiry man said. "Lord have mercy." "Where is he?" Another one demanded, coming forward. "Daniel, where's he been? 12 years, nobody's." "He's dead," Emily said. The room went quiet again, a different quiet. "He's been dead 12 years, she said, and she was so tired that it came out flat, drained of everything. "I don't even know how. That's part of why I'm here. I don't know how my own husband died. He left one night and he never came back, and 3 weeks later, 2 men I'd never seen brought me his wedding ring and his jacket and said he was gone, and they wouldn't tell me anything else, and then they were gone too." She looked around at all of them, all these faces. "And now my son is dying and he wants to know if his father was a good man, and I came here to ask you because you're the only ones left who could possibly tell me the truth." Nobody spoke. And then from the back of the room, a door opened, and a different kind of silence fell, the kind that falls when the man everyone answers to walks into a room. He was tall, late 50s, maybe older. Gray hair pulled back, a thick gray beard, and a face that looked like it had been left out in the weather for 60 years and had decided to win. Scars on the knuckles, scars above the eye. He moved slow, the way powerful men move when they've never in their life needed to hurry, and the men parted for him without being told. On his cut, the patch read Grizzly, and beneath it, President. Victor Kane looked at Emily. Then he looked at the photograph in Raven's hand, and his weathered face gave away absolutely nothing at all. "Who's asking about Daniel Whitaker?" Victor said. His voice was low and gravelly and quiet, and somehow that made it more frightening than if he'd shouted. "His wife," Emily said. "Owen." She lifted her chin. She was terrified, but she'd come too far to shrink now. "Emily, and I've got a dying boy in a hospital bed who is his son. And your name is the last name he's ever going to want to hear, Mr. Kane, whether you help me or not. So I'd appreciate it if you'd hear me out before you throw me back into the rain." Something flickered across Victor Kane's face. It might have been surprise. It might have been respect. With a face like that, it was impossible to tell. He was quiet for a long moment. "Get her a coffee," he finally said, not to her, to the room. "And somebody get her a dry chair." He looked back at Emily. "You've got guts, lady, I'll give you that. Coming here, Daniel would have liked that." "Then he was," Emily's heart leapt. "You knew him. You can tell me. Was he a good man?" And here at last the flicker in Victor Kane's face resolved into something she could read, and it was the last thing on earth she wanted to see. It was pain. "Sit down, Emily," Victor said quietly. "There's things about your husband you don't know, and I'm not sure you're going to thank me for telling you." She sat. The coffee came warm in her frozen hands, and she barely felt it. 15 hardened men stood around her in a warm room full of ghosts, and the oldest, hardest one of them all, pulled up a chair across from her and leaned forward with his scarred elbows on his knees and looked at her with an expression she couldn't name. "You said you don't know how he died," Victor said. "No, you want to. More than anything in this world." Victor Kane nodded slowly. He looked down at his own ruined hands. "Daniel Whitaker didn't just leave one night," he said. "That's not what happened. That's the story that got told to you and to a lot of people because the truth was too dangerous to say out loud. Even now, 12 years later, there's men who'd..." He stopped, started over. "There's a reason nobody came to tell you what really happened, Emily. There's a reason you got a ring and a jacket and a lie." Emily's hands tightened on the coffee mug. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Victor Kane looked her dead in the eye. I'm saying your husband didn't run out on you, he said. Everybody in this room thought he did for a long time. Even us. Even me. We had his name in the dirt for years, Emily. His own brothers. His voice caught rough as gravel over stone. And we were wrong. We were dead wrong. And I've spent a lot of years not knowing how to make that right. And now here you are, 12 years too late, standing in my clubhouse in the rain telling me his boy is dying. He sat back. So no, he said, I can't tell you if Daniel was a good man, not in one word, because it's not a one-word answer, and I won't lie to a dying kid's mother not about this. But I can tell you the truth, the whole truth. It's going to take a while, and some of it's going to hurt, and when I'm done, you're going to understand why nobody ever told you. He nodded toward the door, toward the city, toward the hospital across town where a boy lay counting out his last days with an old photograph on his blanket. And then Victor Kane said, we're going to go see your son, all of us, because if Daniel's kid wants to know who his father was. The old president's jaw tightened, and for just a moment those weathered eyes went bright and wet in the low light. Then I owe it to Daniel to make sure that boy hears every last word of it, from the men who were there, before it's too late. Emily Whitaker sat in a room full of the most feared men in Montana holding a cup of coffee she couldn't drink and realized that she had come looking for her son's answer and had walked straight into the center of the one thing she'd spent 12 years refusing to know. She'd wanted the truth about the man in the photograph. She was about to get it. All of it. And nothing, not for her, not for Logan, not for any of the men standing silent in that warm and ghost-filled room. Nothing was ever going to be the same again. Victor Kane didn't start talking right away. He got up, walked behind the bar, and poured himself something amber into a short glass. He didn't offer Emily any. He came back, sat down heavy in the chair across from her, and for a long moment, he just turned the glass in his scarred fingers, watching the light move through it. You want to know the kind of man Daniel was? He finally said, I got to take you back before you ever met him, before that diner. You know about the diner? He told me he came in and I was the only waitress who didn't hide in the back. Something almost like a smile touched the old man's mouth. That sounds right. That sounds exactly like the kind of thing he'd notice. Who's scared of him and who ain't? He took a slow drink. That was Daniel. He read people. Better than anybody I ever rode with. Better than me, and I've been doing this 40 years. Vic, said the wiry old man from the bar stool, the one who'd taken his cap off. You sure about this? Some of what you're going to say. She earned it, Pete. Victor didn't look up. She drove out here in the rain and knocked on our door with a dead man's picture in her hand. She earned every word. He looked at Emily. You know what he did before he was with us, before the club? No, he never, she stopped. He never told me anything about before. Of course he didn't. Victor nodded slowly. Because before us, Daniel Whitaker was a soldier, Army, 2 tours, came back with a chest full of medals and a head full of things he couldn't put down. He tapped his own temple. You knew that man loved to read, write, big fat paperbacks. Emily's throat closed. Yes, she whispered. Yes, he always... That's where it started, in a hospital bed actually, kind of like your boy in a way. He got hurt over there real bad, took shrapnel through the leg, spent 4 months learning to walk again, and he had nothing to do but read. Read everything. And when he got out, he came back to a country that looked at him like he was a problem to be managed. No job, no money, bad dreams. You know the story, it's 100,000 guys' story. Emily didn't say anything. She was thinking about a man she thought she'd known, coming apart in a place she'd never heard of years before he ever tipped her $40. He found us, Victor went on. Or we found him, doesn't matter which. Point is, a bunch of us in this club, we came back from someplace nobody wanted to hear about, and we found out the only people who understood were each other. That's what this is, Emily. Whatever you read in the papers, whatever that hospital told you when they said no, his voice hardened just slightly. They did say no, didn't they? That's why you came yourself. Yes, of course they did. He drank again. So Daniel found his brothers, and for a few years he was good, Emily. He was solid. He was the guy you wanted next to you when things went bad, because things going bad was the only time he ever seemed calm. Everybody else falling apart, and there's Daniel, quiet, thinking 3 moves ahead. Victor's jaw worked. That's the thing about the man that got him killed in the end. He couldn't ever just save himself. Wasn't built for it. The word landed in the room like a dropped anvil. Killed. Emily set the coffee mug down on the floor beside her chair because her hands weren't steady enough to hold it anymore. You said, her voice shook, you said everyone thought he ran out on me. You said his name was in the dirt, but now you're saying killed. Which is it, Mr. Kane? Which is it? I'm getting there. He held up one scarred hand. It's not simple. If it was simple, somebody would have told you 12 years ago. Just let me get there. Please. She had never in her life imagined a man like this saying please to her. It frightened her more than his size, more than his scars. It told her that whatever was coming was bad enough that even Victor Kane had to work up to it. There was a man, Victor said. Back then, went by Cortez. He wasn't one of ours. He was somebody who moved into the same circles, did business on the edges, the kind of guy you deal with because sometimes you got it, but you never turn your back on him. His face darkened. Around that time, the club was into some things I'm not going to lay out for you in detail because they're not mine to confess and they don't matter to your boy. But understand, it was a bad stretch. We were doing business we shouldn't have been doing with men we shouldn't have been near. And Daniel, he stopped. Daniel didn't like it, Victor said. He was the one who came to me. Middle of the night, right here in this room, sat where you're sitting now, and he said, Vic, this is going to get somebody killed. We keep dealing with Cortez, one of us is going to end up in the ground. The old man's eyes went far away. And you know what I told him? Emily shook her head. I told him to mind his business and ride his bike. Victor's voice was flat, and underneath the flatness was 40 years of regret. I told him he worried too much. I told him he was letting the war get in his head again. He looked at her. I was the president. He was my brother, and he came to me with the truth, and I told him to shut up and fall in line. Remember that. When we get to the end of this, you remember I said that. A young member near the pool table shifted his weight, and the old floorboards creaked, and it was the only sound in the room. So what happened? Emily said. What happened is he was right. Victor drained the glass and set it down hard on the arm of the chair. What always happens when you don't listen to the one guy smart enough to see it coming. It went bad. One night a deal with Cortez's people, out at a spot we used, it went sideways. Cortez decided he wanted more than his cut. He decided he wanted to make an example, teach the club a lesson about who was really in charge. And he had men, and they had guns, and there were 4 of ours out there that night with almost nothing. Emily's whole body had gone rigid. Was Daniel wasn't even supposed to be there. Victor's voice cracked just slightly, just for a word. That's the part that 12 years Emily and I still can't. He wasn't on the roster for that run. He came anyway. You want to know why? She couldn't speak. She just stared at him. Because a kid was on that run, Victor said. 19 years old, a prospect. Not even a full member yet, just a kid trying to earn his way in. And Daniel found out the kid was going out to something dangerous. And Daniel, who had a wife and a baby boy at home, who had every reason in the world to stay in bed that night, Daniel got on his bike and rode out there in the dark to look out for a 19-year-old he barely knew. Victor's hands had curled into fists on his knees. Because that's who he was. He couldn't stand by and let a kid walk into something. Not in the army, not with us, not ever. Around the room, the older men had gone completely still. Pete on the bar stool had his cap crushed in both hands and his head bowed. That kid, Victor said quietly, and lifted his eyes and looked across the room at the wiry old man on the bar stool. You want to tell her, Pete, or should I? And Emily turned and looked and understood. Pete's shoulders were shaking. That was you, she breathed. The old man couldn't answer for a second. When he did, his voice came out wrecked. I was 19, Pete said. I was a stupid 19-year-old kid who thought I knew everything, and I walked into a trap that would have killed me, and I would have deserved it for being that dumb. And Daniel Whitaker, a man I'd talked to maybe 3 times in my life, Daniel got me behind a truck when the shooting started, put his own body between me and them, threw me his keys and told me to ride, told me to get help, told me he'd hold him off. Pete pressed the cap against his eyes. I didn't want to leave him. I swear to God, ma'am, I didn't want to leave. And he grabbed me by the collar and he looked at me and he said, Pete's voice broke completely. The wiry old man sat there in a room full of hardened men and cried openly, 12 years too late. and nobody moved to stop him or ease it because they all knew there wasn't any easing it. He said, "You got your whole life, kid." Pete finally got out. "Go live it. Tell my boy his dad wasn't scared." The room broke. Emily heard herself make a sound she'd never made before, some torn open thing, and she pressed both hands over her mouth. 12 years. 12 years of your dad was trouble. 12 years of a garage shelf and a closed door and a wall she'd built so high. And the truth had been out here the whole time in a warm room full of ghosts waiting for her to be brave enough to knock. "He held them off," Victor said, and now his own voice was rough as broken glass. "Long enough for Pete to get clear, long enough for the rest to scatter. He bought 3 men their lives that night with his own, and Cortez's people—" The old man stopped, swallowed. "They didn't leave anything for a proper story. You understand, there was nothing clean about it. Nothing we could take to you and say, here's what happened to your husband, here's how he died a hero. There was just a mess and a war starting, and men who'd kill anybody connected to any of us, including a wife, including a baby." Emily lowered her hands. "That's why," she whispered. "That's why nobody came. That's why I got a ring and a jacket and a lie." Victor nodded slow and heavy. "2 of ours brought you his ring and his cut," he said. "You remember them?" "Barely. They wouldn't look at me. I thought they were ashamed of him. I thought he'd done something and they were covering it up, and that's why they wouldn't look at you," Victor said. "Because if Cortez's people had known where you lived, if they'd known there was a sea and a son, they'd have finished the job. Wives get killed in these things, Emily. Kids do too. Those 2 men brought you his things in the middle of the night and told you a lie and disappeared, and they did it to keep you and that baby alive. And then we let the story stand, all of us. We let the world think Daniel Whitaker ran out on his family because a coward's got no enemies. A coward's family is safe. A hero's family is a target." The weight of it came down on Emily all at once. 12 years of a story she'd believed, 12 years of a bitterness she'd carried, 12 years of teaching her son without ever meaning to, without ever saying it out loud, that his father was a man who'd left. And the whole time, "I told him," she said. The words came out of her in pieces. "I told my son, when he was 10, he asked me, and I said his father was trouble. I said that's the last we'd talk about it." She looked up at Victor Kane with something close to horror. "I told my dying son that his father was trouble, and it was a lie, and you're telling me the man died a hero, and my boy is in a hospital bed right now thinking—" "Then we fix it," Victor said. "He's got days, Mr. Kane. Maybe less." The doctor said, "Then we don't waste any." He stood up, and when Victor Kane stood, the whole room seemed to lean toward him. "How long's it take to get to that hospital from here?" Emily stared at him. 20 minutes. "But it's the middle of the night. They won't let a bunch of—" "Let me worry about that." He was already moving, already turning to the room, and something had changed in him, some engine turning over. "Pete, get up. You've been carrying this 12 years. You're going to go say it to his face. Raven." "Vic." Raven stepped forward, and his voice had a warning in it. "Hospital's not going to let 40 of us through the door at 2 in the morning. Security's going to lose their minds. We roll up on a children's hospital with the whole chapter, somebody's calling the cops before we hit the parking lot." "I know it. So what's the play?" Victor Kane was quiet for a second. Then he looked at Emily, and there was something in his weathered face she couldn't read, some plan, already forming something that made the other men glance at each other. "How old's your boy?" Victor asked. 18. "He ever been on a bike? Since he was a baby, I mean. He ever ridden?" "No, never. I wouldn't—" Emily's voice failed. "After Daniel, I couldn't stand to look at a motorcycle. I never let him near one. He used to ask when he was little, and I always said no. That was another thing I took from him without knowing." Fresh tears started. "God, how many things did I—" "Stop." Victor's voice wasn't unkind, but it was firm. "You're going to do that to yourself all night, and we don't have all night. You did what you did to keep him alive, same as those 2 men who lied to you, same as all of us. You protected your boy the only way you knew how. Nobody in this room's going to sit here and let you call yourself the villain of this thing." He looked around. Anybody feel different? Nobody did. 15 hard faces, and not one of them would meet her eyes with anything but a kind of grief that matched her own. "Here's what's going to happen," Victor said. It's the middle of the night, so you're right. We can't roll the whole chapter up on that place right now. We'd scare the daylights out of every sick kid in the building and get nothing but arrested. So here's the play. He pointed at Emily. You go back tonight, right now. You go sit with your boy and you tell him you found us. You tell him his dad's brothers are coming. You get him through the night because a man who's got something to look forward to fights harder than a man who's got nothing. And I've seen that be the difference more than once. You give him a reason to see the sun come up. Emily was nodding before he finished, tears streaming, some broken thing in her chest, starting impossibly to feel like hope. And tomorrow, Victor said. But we do it right. I make some calls. I know the head of that hospital security, believe it or not. His brother rode with a chapter down in Wyoming, small world. I talked to the administrators man to man. We do it legal, we do it clean, we come in daylight, and we do it in a way that boy will remember for the rest of his... He stopped himself. The whole room heard the word he didn't say. Life. For the rest of his life. Except there wasn't going to be a rest of his life. There was going to be days. And the arithmetic of that hung in the warm air, and Victor Kane's jaw tightened. And for one terrible moment, the most powerful man in the room looked like he might not be able to keep going. For the rest of his life, Victor finished quiet and fierce. However long that turns out to be, that boy is going to know his father, and he's going to know it from the men who watched Daniel Whitaker die saving one of us. And he's going to know that the club his daddy bled for never forgot. Not for one day. That's a promise. You hear me, Emily? That's a Hell's Angels promise. And around here, that means more than any promise you ever got from a doctor or a lawyer or a hospital that told you no. Emily Whitaker stood up. Her legs barely held her. She looked around the room at these men she'd been afraid of her whole life, at Pete with his crushed cap and his wet face, at Raven's slab of a body, and the grief in his hard eyes at old Victor Kane standing there, making promises the way other men breathed. Why, Palme, she said. Why would you do all this? For a woman you met an hour ago, for a boy you've never seen. And Victor Kane looked at her and gave her the truest answer she would ever get. Because we owe him, he said simply. Because 12 years ago, your husband did the bravest thing I ever saw a man do, and we repaid him by letting the world call him a coward. We let his own son grow up thinking his daddy ran. That debt's been sitting on this club's chest for 12 years, Emily, and tonight you walked in out of the rain and gave us a chance to pay it before that boy... His voice caught. He pushed through it. Before it's too late. And there is not one man in this room who's gonna let that chance go. Now go. Go be with your son. We'll come with the sunrise. She made it to the door before she turned back. Mr. Kane. Victor. Victor. She held the photograph against her chest. She realized Raven had pressed it back into her hand at some point without her noticing. What was the jacket? The two men brought me his, cut his leather. It's been in a toolbox in my garage for 12 years. Logan found it 3 weeks ago. That's what started all this. He found the jacket and the patch and this picture, and he... She swallowed. Should I bring it tomorrow? Would that be... Something moved across Victor Kane's face. You still have his cut, he said slowly. Yes. The old man was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Raven. Raven looked back at him, and some silent thing passed between the two of them, some understanding that Emily wasn't part of. No, Victor finally said. Don't bring it. Why? Because that's not how a man gets his colors, Emily. Victor's voice had gone strange thick. A man doesn't inherit his father's cut out of a toolbox. That's not what it means. That's not what any of this means. He looked at her hard. You just bring your boy, and you bring yourself, and you let us handle the rest. There's a way this is supposed to go. Daniel's boy is going to get it done right, or we're not going to do it at all. She didn't understand. She wouldn't understand until the next night when 300 engines shook the windows of a children's hospital, and she watched the president of the Hells Angels do something she'd remember until the day she died. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, Emily Whitaker drove back across the sleeping city with a dead man's photograph on the passenger seat and 12 years of the wrong story dissolving behind her, and she took the elevator up 4 floors, and she walked into her son's room where the monitor was beeping slow and steady in the dark, and she sat down on the edge of his bed and she put her hand on his thin chest and she woke him gently. Logan, she whispered. Logan, baby, wake up. I have to tell you something. His eyes opened cloudy with sleep and medication. Mom, what time is it? I found them, she said, and her voice broke wide open, and she was laughing and crying at the same time. Baby, I found them. I found your father's bomb. I went to them, and I found them, and they knew him. Logan, they knew your dad and everything I ever told you. She stopped. She made herself look him in the eye. This was the hardest part. This was the thing she owed him more than anything. I have to tell you something, and I need you to forgive me for it, she said. Something I got wrong, something I got so wrong for so long, and I didn't know. Baby, I swear to you, I didn't know. Logan's eyes had come fully awake now. Mom, you're scaring me. What is it? Emily Whitaker took her dying son's hand and pressed it to her wet cheek and told him the truth she had come so far to find. Your father wasn't trouble, she said. Your father was a hero, and tomorrow when the sun comes up, the men who watched him die a hero are going to come here and tell you every single thing about him. And there's nothing on this earth that's going to stop them. Logan stared at her. And then the boy who hadn't asked for food in a week, who hadn't asked to see his friends, who had stopped asking her to open the blinds, the boy who had stopped wanting anything at all except one impossible thing, Logan Whitaker's face crumpled and lit up and crumpled again, and he grabbed his mother's hand with more strength than she'd felt in him for a month. He wasn't, Logan couldn't get it out. He wasn't bad, he wasn't all. This time I thought, I know, baby. Tell me. His voice was fierce now, alive in a way that terrified and thrilled her both. Tell me everything. Right now, I don't want to wait for morning. What if I don't, Mom? What if I don't make it to morning? Tell me now. You're going to make it to morning, Emily said, and she gripped his hand hard, and she believed it. She made herself believe it because Victor Kane had told her that a man who's got something to look forward to fights harder, and she was going to give her son the biggest thing anybody had ever had to look forward to. You hear me, Logan Whitaker? You are going to make it to morning because your father's brothers are coming and they are going to give you something, and I don't even know what it is yet, but I saw their faces when they talked about you, and I am telling you, you do not want to miss it. So you're going to hold on. For me, for him, you're going to hold on until you hear those engines. And in the dark of a hospital room 4 floors up, a dying boy who had spent his whole short life believing his father was a man who left made his mother a promise. Okay, Logan whispered. Okay, Mom, I'll hold on. He held her hand and he didn't let go. And outside the window, the rain finally stopped. And somewhere across the sleeping city, a room full of hard men sat up the rest of the night making phone calls and polishing chrome and getting ready to keep a promise 12 years overdue. Logan held on. He held on through the worst hours, the 2 to 5 hours, the hours when the body is lowest and the machines go quietest and more people slip away than at any other time of the night. Emily didn't sleep. She sat in the plastic chair with his hand in both of hers, and she watched his chest rise and fall. And every time the interval stretched a beat too long, her own heart stopped, and every time he pulled in the next breath, she started breathing again with him. Around 4, he stirred. Mom, I'm here, baby. Tell me about him, the bike part, the gas tank part. You said I couldn't remember, but I think I do. So she told him again, softer, this time, the story of the 2-year-old on the gas tank and the rumble and the hiccups, and somewhere in the middle of it, Logan's mouth curved into a smile and he drifted off. And this time when he slept, his face was easy, and Emily put her forehead down on the edge of the bed, and finally, for an hour, she slept too. When she woke, it was because of the light. Gray at first, then gold coming in around the edges of the blinds. Morning, he'd made it to morning. She lifted her head, and there was Logan awake, already staring at the window, with an expression she hadn't seen on him in months. I made it, he said quietly. You made it. They coming, Emily checked her phone. There was a text sent at 6:14 a.m. from a number she didn't recognize, and her heart climbed into her throat when she read it. Emily, Kane. Talked to the hospital last night, then again this morning. It's arranged. We come at noon. Get your boy ready. Tell him his father's brothers are keeping their word. V. She read it out loud twice, and Logan closed his eyes and let out a long breath, and when he opened them again, they were wet. Noon, he said. Noon. He did the math, and she watched him do it, watched him measure the hours he had against the hours until they came. That's a long time to wait, Mom. You've waited 18 years to know the truth about your dad, she said. You can do 6 more hours. He laughed at that, a real laugh then, but real, the first one she'd heard from him in longer than she could stand to think about, and it turned into a cough. And the cough took a while to stop, and when it did, he was pale and spent, but he was still smiling. The morning did not go smoothly. At 9, the day shift charge nurse, a hard, competent woman named Ms. Okafor, who ran the floor like a ship's captain, came in for the morning check, and Emily made the mistake of mentioning casually, joyfully, that they were expecting some visitors around noon. "How many visitors?" Ms. Okafor said in the tone of a woman who has been ambushed before. "I'm not entirely sure," Emily admitted. By 10, it had become a situation. Word had gone up the chain overnight, and the chain had woken up, and now there was a small crowd of administrators outside Logan's room, having the kind of low, tense conversation that people have when they're trying not to be heard by the patient. Emily caught fragments through the door. Liability, other families, reputation of the institution. Whose idea was this? And then a name, the head of security, a man named Gutierrez, and the administrators went quiet in a way that told Emily something had shifted. At 10:30, the door opened, and a compact, gray-haired man in a security uniform came in alone. He had a hard face and careful eyes, and he stood at the foot of Logan's bed with his cap in his hands. "You're the mom," he said. "Emily Whitaker, yes." "Frank Gutierrez. I run security for the building." He looked at Logan, and something in his hard face softened by a degree. "This the young man?" "That's my son, Logan." Gutierrez studied this boy for a moment. Then he pulled a folded photograph out of his breast pocket, an old one Emily saw creased and worn, and he held it out to her. "Victor Kane called me at 5 o'clock this morning," Gutierrez said. "Woke me up. First thing he did was ask about my brother. My brother rode with a chapter in Cheyenne for 11 years before a truck took him out on I-25. He nodded at the photo in Emily's hand. It was a younger Gutierrez in leather, his arm around a big grinning man who had to be the brother. "So when Victor Kane calls me and tells me a story about a man named Daniel Whitaker and a boy who's got days left, I don't hear a security problem, ma'am. I hear a brother asking a brother for a favor. You understand?" Emily's eyes filled. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet. The administrators upstairs are having a heart attack, and it's my job to make this happen without any of them stroking out." He turned to the door, then paused and looked back at Logan. "Son, you know how many of these men are planning to come?" "No, sir," Logan said. "How many?" Gutierrez almost smiled. "Kane wouldn't give me a number. He just said, and I quote, 'enough.'" He put his cap back on. "I've been doing security 30 years, kid. I've seen presidents come through this building. I've seen movie stars. Whatever's about to happen at noon, I got a feeling it's gonna be something none of us forget. You hold tight." He went out, and Emily heard his voice in the hall, flat and final, cutting through the administrator's anxiety. "It's handled. It's happening. Anybody's got a problem, they can bring it to me." And the anxious voices went quiet, and the situation somehow was over. 11 o'clock. Logan couldn't stay still. He wanted to sit up, so Emily raised the bed. He wanted the blinds open, the boy who hadn't asked her to open the blinds in weeks. So she opened them, and the noon light came pouring in, and he turned his face to it like a plant. He wanted his hair fixed, and she wet a comb and fixed it, her hands shaking, and he said, "Ow, Mom," when she pulled a tangle, and they both laughed because it was such a normal, alive, ordinary thing to say. "What if I don't measure up?" Logan said suddenly. Emily stopped combing. "What? To him? To my dad?" He was looking at the window. "You're telling me he was this hero? He saved a guy. He was a soldier. He read books. Everybody loved him. And I'm a kid who never did anything. Mom, I ran track. That's it. That's the whole list. I ran fast in a small town, and then I got sick, and now I'm gonna die in a bed without ever..." His voice thickened. "What if they take one look at me and think that's it? That's what Daniel died for. That's all that's left of him. Some sick kid who never even..." "Stop." Emily took his face in both her hands gently, the way you'd hold something precious. "You listen to me, Logan Whitaker. You listen good, because I need you to hear this before they come." He went still. 3 weeks ago, she said, you had a wish. One wish. Any wish in the world. And you didn't ask for a trip or a party or a famous person. You asked for the truth. You asked to know who your father really was, even though you knew it might be something terrible. Even though everyone told you no. Even though it scared your own mother half to death. Her thumbs wiped the tears off his cheeks as they came. Do you understand what that took? Do you have any idea how many grown men would rather die comfortable with a lie than face the truth? And you, sick as you are, weak as you are, you chose the truth. You chose the hard thing. You chose it when you had every reason not to. Logan's chin trembled. That's your father in you, Emily said. That's exactly your father in you. He couldn't stand by and let a kid walk into danger, and you couldn't stand to die without knowing who he was. Same courage, same heart, exact same thing. She pressed her forehead to his. You measure up, baby. You measure up so much it breaks my heart. And when those men walk in that door, they're not going to see a sick kid who never did anything. They're going to see Daniel Whitaker's son, who was brave enough to go looking for him. And I promise you, that's exactly what they came here to find. Logan cried, then really cried the way he hadn't let himself since all this started, and Emily held him careful of the lines and the tubes, and she rocked her dying son the way she'd rocked her infant son 18 years before, and neither of them heard the first faint sound in the distance. But Miss Okafor did. She was at the nurse's station down the hall when she heard it, and she lifted her head and she frowned, because it didn't make sense. She walked to the window at the end of the corridor and looked out toward the highway, and what she saw made her put her hand flat against the glass. Frank, she said into her radio, her captain's voice gone strange and small. Frank, you need to come look at this. Because it was coming up the highway, and it was not a few motorcycles, it was not a dozen, it was not 40, it was a river. It filled the highway from shoulder to shoulder, headlight to taillight further back than she could see, a slow-moving flood of chrome and leather and thunder, and the sound of it was reaching the building, now low and enormous, felt in the chest before it was heard in the ears, and it was growing, and it was not stopping. How many? Gutierrez's voice crackled back. Ms. Okafor stared out the window, and she could not find a number big enough. Frank, she said, I think it's all of them. I think it's every one of them there is. In Logan's room, the boy lifted his head off his mother's shoulder. Mom, he said, do you hear that? Emily went still, and then she heard it too. The sound she'd been told to wait for, the sound she'd promised him, coming up out of the earth itself, in a rolling thunder that had no lightning and no rain and no end. She got up and went to the window, and she looked down, and her hand flew to her mouth. The parking lot below was already filling, and the street beyond it, and the highway beyond that. Motorcycles, hundreds of them, thousands more than she could count, more than she could believe, pouring in from every direction, and the riders were dismounting and forming up. And even from 4 floors up, she could see the patches, the leather, the colors. Not just one chapter, she realized. Not just Billings. There were colors from everywhere. Wyoming, the Dakotas, Idaho, Washington. Word had gone out in the night, up and down every highway in the Mountain West. Brother to brother, chapter to chapter, and it had said one thing. Daniel Whitaker's boy is dying and he wants to know his father. Ride. And they had ridden. All of them, from everywhere. Logan. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. She turned from the window with tears streaming down her face and a look on it he'd never seen. Baby, come look. You have to come look. The nurses helped. Ms. Okafor herself, all her hardness gone, helped Emily wheel the whole bed to the window, oxygen and lines and all, and they raised him up so he could see. And Logan Whitaker looked down at a sea of the most feared men in America, come from across half the country, filling the streets around a children's hospital. As far as the eye could see, all of them there for him, all of them there for his father, and all of them there to keep a 12-year promise to a man who died so a 19-year-old kid could grow old. The boy who was afraid he didn't measure up looked down at that impossible ocean of thunder, and he began to shake, and his mother wrapped her arms around him from behind, and the two of them wept at the glass. They came, Logan said. He said it over and over like he couldn't make it be real. Mom, they came, they actually came for me. They came for me. They came for you, baby. Down below, the engines cut. All of them. In a wave that rolled from the front of the crowd to the back, 3,000 engines went silent, one after another, until the sudden quiet was almost louder than the thunder had been. And in that quiet, a single figure separated from the front of the crowd and walked toward the hospital entrance. Even from 4 floors up, Emily knew him. The gray hair, the unhurried walk, the way the whole ocean of men seemed to lean toward him as he passed. Victor Kane, and he was carrying something. both arms, held out in front of him, careful the way you carry something that matters more than you do. Emily couldn't tell what it was from up here, but she saw the men he passed go still as he went by. She saw them touch their chests. She saw one enormous rider, Raven it had to be. Raven fall in behind him, and then Pete, small and wiry, and then a dozen more forming up into a column behind their president, and the column began to move toward the doors, and the whole silent ocean of men turned to watch it go. "He's coming up," Emily breathed. "Logan, he's coming up right now. Victor Kane, the president, he's coming up here to you." Logan gripped the window frame with both thin hands. "What's he carrying, Mom?" he asked. "He's got something. What is it?" And Emily Whitaker, who had asked Victor Kane that very question the night before, "Should I bring the jacket? Should I bring his cut?" and been told, "No, don't bring it. There's a way this is supposed to go." Emily suddenly understood all at once what the old man had meant. A man doesn't inherit his father's cut out of a toolbox. That's not what it means. She put her hand over her mouth. "Oh," she said. "Oh, Logan." "What, Mom? What is it?" But she couldn't answer. She couldn't get the words out. Because she just realized what was about to happen, what Victor Kane had been planning since the moment she told him her son had found a leather cut in an old toolbox, and it was so much bigger than anything she'd let herself imagine that she couldn't do anything but hold her son and shake. Down the hall, the elevator doors opened, and the sound of boots, many boots heavy and slow and deliberate, began to move down the corridor toward Logan Whitaker's room. Ms. Okafor stepped out of the way. Gutierrez, standing by the nurse's station, took off his cap and held it against his chest. Doors opened up and down the hall as other families, other patients, other nurses looked out to see what was coming. And what was coming was a column of leather-clad men led by a gray-bearded giant carrying something in his outstretched arms, and every one of them fell silent at the sight. The boots stopped outside Logan's door, and Victor Kane filled the doorway and looked across the room at the boy in the bed by the window. Daniel's boy, the same eyes God, the exact same eyes, and the hard old president of the Hells Angels, who had buried more brothers than he could count, who had not wept at any of their funerals, stood in the doorway of a hospital room and had to stop and gather himself before he could speak. In his arms he held a leather vest, new, black, and on the back freshly stitched the colors of the club, and above them, where a member's name goes a single word that Logan couldn't read yet from across the room. "Logan Whitaker," Victor Kane said, and his gravel voice was thick and unsteady and carried in the silent room like a bell. "My name's Victor Kane. Your daddy called me Vic. I rode with him for 6 years, and I was the fool who didn't listen to him the night he tried to warn me, and I have carried that for 12 years. He took one step into the room. "There's 3,000 men outside this building, son. They came from 6 states. Some of them rode all night. Not one of them ever met you. And every single one of them came because of who your father was and because of one thing I told them on the phone." He took another step. "I told them Daniel Whitaker's boy went looking for the truth about his old man when he could have just laid down and quit. I told them you were bold enough to ask the hard question. And I told them, his voice cracked clean in half, and he didn't try to hide it, and neither did any of the hard men behind him. I told them it was time this club paid a debt it's owed for 12 years, and they got on their bikes and they came. For you, for him, for the name Whitaker." Logan was crying too hard to speak. Emily held him up, and Victor Kane crossed the last of the distance to the bed and stood over Daniel Whitaker's dying son and slowly, reverently turned the leather vest around so the boy could finally read the words stitched above the colors. And Logan read it, and the sound that came out of him was one his mother would remember for the rest of her life. Because the words stitched on the back of that brand new cut in careful thread above the colors that 3,000 men had ridden across 6 states to honor was not prospect. It was one word. And it was his father's road name, the name Daniel had ridden under, the name none of them had spoken in 12 years, the name Emily herself had never even known her husband carried. And now it was Logan's. The name was Thunder. Logan read it and read it again, and his lips moved around it without any sound coming out, and then he looked up at Victor Kane with a question so big it filled his whole ruined face. He couldn't finish. "That was your daddy's road name," Victor said quietly. "Daniel Thunder Whitaker. He earned it his first year on account of you could hear him coming a mile off, and on account of," the old man's mouth twitched, Well, on account of he had a temper like a summer storm when somebody he loved got hurt. Came on fast, hit hard, and then it was clear skies again, like nothing happened. Thunder. It fit him. It fit him better than any name I ever gave a man. Mom. Logan turned to Emily and his eyes were wild with it. Did you know? Did you know his name was? No, Emily whispered. She had her hand pressed over her heart. No baby. 12 years. 8 years of marriage. And he never told me. I don't think he wanted that part of himself in the house with us. I think he kept it out there with them to keep it away from you. She looked at Victor stricken. Is that right? Is that why I never? That's exactly right. Victor nodded slowly. Daniel kept 2 lives, ma'am, and he kept them separate on purpose. And the wall between them was you and that boy. Out here, he was thunder. In your house, he was just Daniel, a husband, a father, a man who put his kid on a gas tank. The old man's voice roughened. He used to talk about you two. Not much. He wasn't a man who said much, but sometimes late after a long ride, he'd have a couple beers, and he'd get quiet, and he'd say, "You know what I did today, Vic? Before all this, I sat on the porch and watched my boy chase a soccer ball for 2 hours. Best thing I ever did in my life." And then he'd go quiet again, and none of us said a word because we all knew we were hearing the one true thing that man had, and it wasn't us. It was you. Emily broke completely. Ms. Okafor, standing in the doorway, wiped her own eyes with the back of her hand and did not pretend she wasn't. Logan was staring at the vest in Victor's arms. Is that? His voice shook. You want me to? I want you to do something for me first, Victor said. He pulled the plastic visitor's chair up beside the bed and lowered his big frame into it, slow, his knees cracking until his weathered face was level with the boys. Behind him, Raven and Pete and the others filed silently into the room, and along the walls, filling it, a wall of leather and grief and something fiercer than grief. Before I put your daddy's name on your shoulders, Victor said, I want to make sure you understand what it means. Because this isn't a costume, son. This isn't a nice gesture for a sick kid. If it was that, I wouldn't insult you with it, and I wouldn't insult him. He leaned in. You know why the club never let this name die? 12 years and no man's ridden as thunder since your father. You know why? No, sir. Because a road name gets retired when a man dies with honor, and there's nobody worthy to carry it. Victor's eyes held the boys. We held it 12 years, waiting. And I'll be straight with you, Logan. I never thought we'd have anyone to give it to. I figured it'd just fade out. Another good name lost. His voice dropped. And then last night your mama walked into my clubhouse in the rain, and she told me Daniel had a son, and that son went looking for the truth when he could have quit. And I knew right then. I knew the name had been waiting for you the whole time. The room was utterly silent. So here's what I need, Victor said. I need you to tell me you understand. When you wear this, you're not wearing a gift. You're carrying your father, everything he was. The good and the hard. The soldier and the reader and the fool who rode out on a run he wasn't even on to save a kid he barely knew because he could not stand by. The old man's jaw worked. That's what's on your shoulders when you put this on. That's the weight. Can you carry it? And Logan Whitaker, 18 years old, days from death, so weak, he'd needed help to sit up. Looked the president of the Hells Angels dead in the eye and said in a voice that came out stronger than any word he'd spoken in a month, Yes, sir, I can carry it. Something moved through the room, a low sound from the men along the walls, not words, just a deep, wordless assent, a rumble in the chest. That was the closest thing those men had to a prayer. Then sit up straight for me, son, Victor Kane said, and his voice finally broke all the way open. Sit up straight and let your daddy's brothers see you. Emily helped him. She got behind him and she braced him, and Logan sat up as straight as his broken body would allow, and Victor Kane rose from the chair with the vest held open in both hands, and he came around behind the boy, and Emily moved aside, and the old man settled the leather over Logan's thin shoulders, the way you'd settle a blanket over a newborn, slow and careful, and like it was the most important thing he would ever do. The vest was too big. Of course it was. It hung off the boy's wasted frame like it was made for the man he'd never gotten to become. But Victor smoothed it down over his shoulders and squared the colors on his back and rested both his heavy, scarred hands there for a moment, and then he stepped back. And Victor Kane, president of the Billings chapter of the Hells Angels, looked at Daniel's son, wearing Daniel's name, and he brought his fist to his chest and he bowed his head. And behind him, every man in that room did the same. Raven, Pete, all of them. Fists to chests, heads bowed in a hospital room to a dying boy in a leather vest, 3 sizes too big. "Welcome home, Thunder," Victor said. Logan made a sound and reached up and gripped the front of the vest with both hands, holding it against himself like he was afraid it might be taken away, like he was afraid he might wake up, and he looked around the room at all those bowed heads and all those raised fists, and his whole body was shaking. He got out. "I don't know what to." "You don't have to say anything," Pete said, stepping forward from the wall. The wiry old man crouched down beside the bed, his cap in his hands, and his lined face was wet. "You don't gotta say a word, son, but I got something I need to say to you. I've needed to say it for 12 years, and I never had nobody to say it to." Logan turned to him. "My name's Pete," the old man said, "and I'm alive because of your father." Emily watched her son's face as he understood who he was looking at. "You're the kid," Logan whispered, "the 19-year-old, from that night." "I'm the kid," Pete's voice barely held. "I'm 61 years old now, son. I got 3 grown daughters, and I got 7 grandbabies. And last spring, I watched my oldest grandson graduate high school. And every single one of them, my girls, my grandbabies, all of them, every one of them is alive and walking this earth because your daddy pushed me behind a truck and told me to ride." The old man's shoulders shook. "I got a whole life, Logan. 42 years of a life I was never supposed to have. My whole family tree had only exist because Daniel Whitaker decided a stupid 19-year-old kid was worth more than his own skin. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You want to know if your father was a good man?" Pete reached out and took Logan's hand in both of his. "There are 17 people alive today who wouldn't exist without him," Pete said. "My children, their children. All of us come from that one night, that one choice your daddy made. 17 people, son. And every last one of us owes it to Thunder." He pressed the boy's hand to his own chest. "So don't you ever wonder if he was good. Don't you die wondering that. He was the best man I ever knew, and I have spent 12 years grieving him, and today I get to look his son in the eye and finally say thank you. Thank you, Logan. Thank you for being his. Thank you for coming to find us. You gave an old man a chance to pay a debt before it was too late, and you'll never know what that means to me." Logan pulled the old man into an embrace, awkward and full of tubes and lines, and the two of them held on the 19-year-old who'd lived and the 18-year-old who wouldn't connect it across 12 years by one man's final choice. And there was not a dry eye anywhere in that room or in the hall outside it. And then Logan pulled back and something crossed his face, some new thought, and he looked up at Victor. "The men outside," he said, "the 3,000, you said some of them rode all night from other states. They've never met me." "That's right. Can they?" Logan's voice caught. "I want to see them, really see them, not from the window. I want to. Is there any way I could?" The administrators, if they'd been in the room, would have said no. There were 100 reasons for no. He was too fragile to move, too fragile to go outside. The risk was enormous, the liability unthinkable. But the administrators weren't in the room. Frank Gutierrez was. He'd been standing in the doorway the whole time, cap in his hands. And now he stepped forward and he looked at Victor Kane and the 2 brothers. By proxy, had a silent conversation with their eyes, and then Gutierrez turned to Emily. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, "it's your call, nobody else's. Not mine, not the hospital's. Yours. If you say the word, I will personally clear a path to the roof. We got a helipad bid up there. The whole city rolls out below it, and I will make sure your son sees every one of those men, and every one of those men sees him. It's against about 9 rules. I'll answer for all 9. But it's your call, and you gotta make it knowing," his voice gentled, "knowing it might cost him. Moving him, it might be too much. I won't lie to you about that." Emily looked at her son, and Logan looked back at her, and she saw in his face the same thing she'd seen the day he made his wish. The boy who chose the hard thing, the boy who chose the truth, the boy who chose to live every second he had left instead of hiding from the end. "Mom," he said quietly, "I've been in this bed for 3 months. I'm gonna die in a bed no matter what. But I don't have to die today, and I will never ever get another chance to look 3,000 men in the eye and know they came from my dad. He squeezed her hand. Let me have this. Please, let me have the whole thing. Emily Whitaker had spent 12 years saying no to motorcycles. 12 years of no, you can't, it's not safe. I couldn't stand it. 12 years of protecting him from the very thing that turned out to be his birthright. She was done saying no. Take us up, she said to Gutierrez, and her voice didn't shake at all. Take us to the roof. Let my son meet his father's family. What happened next happened fast, and it happened like a military operation because half the men in that room had once been exactly that. Gutierrez cleared the elevators and the corridors. Ms. Okafor and two other nurses transferred Logan to a transport gurney with the oxygen and the monitors moving with a speed and tenderness that told Emily they'd decided all of them, every professional in that building, that whatever the rules said, this was going to happen and it was going to happen right. Raven and Pete flanked the gurney like an honor guard. Victor went ahead, glasshead, and someone Raven, it turned out, on his phone sent one text down to the ocean of men in the streets below. He's coming to the roof. He's wearing Thunder's colors. Look up. 3,000 men looked up. When the rooftop door opened and they wheeled Logan Whitaker out into the enormous noon light 4 floors of hospital below him, and the whole city spread out beyond, and the mountains standing blue and eternal on the horizon, the first thing that reached him was the sound. It started small, a single engine somewhere in the crowd roaring to life, then another, then 10, then 100, then all of them, 3,000 engines igniting in a wave that rolled out across the streets and off the buildings and up into the sky, the loudest sound Emily had ever heard. A sound you didn't hear so much as stand inside of. And it wasn't threatening and it wasn't frightening. It was a roar of welcome, a thunder called up for a boy named Thunder, and it went on and on and on. They wheeled him to the edge, to the low rooftop wall, and they raised the head of the gurney so he could see. And Logan Whitaker looked down at 3,000 of the most feared men in America filling the streets in every direction, straddling their idling machines, and every single one of them, as the gurney came into view, raising a fist to the sky. For him, for his father, for the name on his back. The boy who'd been afraid he didn't measure up. The boy who'd never done anything but run fast in a small town. The boy who'd asked for the impossible and been told no by everyone until his mother walked into the rain. He lifted his own hand, thin trembling, hooked up to lines weighing almost nothing, and he raised his fist back at them. And 3,000 men roared. Emily stood beside her son, with her hand on his shoulder over the leather, over the colors, and she looked down at that impossible sea of thunder, and she thought about Daniel, about the diner and the $40 tip, about the fat paperbacks with the cracked spines, about the gas tank and the hiccups, about the porch and the soccer ball, and the one true thing he'd had, about the night he rode out on a run he wasn't on to save a kid he barely knew and never came home. About 12 years of your dad was trouble. About the wall she'd built, and the toolbox on the high shelf, and the truth waiting all along in a warm room full of ghosts. And she leaned down close to her son's ear so he could hear her over the thunder, and she said the things she'd come all this way to be able to say. Your father's here, baby, Emily whispered. Look at all of him. That's your dad. That's what he left behind. All these men, all this loyalty, all this love, that's the shape he made in the world. And it's still here 12 years later, and now it belongs to you. She pressed her cheek to his. He wasn't trouble, Logan. He was this. Your whole life you had the wrong word. This is the right one, this. Logan couldn't answer. He didn't try. He just kept his fist raised to the roaring sky and let the tears run down into the leather collar of his father's name. And he smiled the wide, bright, fearless smile from the old photographs. The smile Emily hadn't seen since he was a healthy boy. The smile she'd been so sure the disease had taken for good. It hadn't taken it. It had only been waiting. Waiting for this. Waiting for the truth. Waiting for the thunder. And high on a rooftop above a city that had feared these men for 50 years, a dying boy wore his father's name and his father's colors, and 3,000 brothers roared their love up at him until the windows shook and the mountains echoed, and the whole world for one impossible afternoon belonged to Daniel Whitaker's son. They didn't take him back down right away. Logan wouldn't let them. He kept his fist in the air until his arm gave out, and even then he wouldn't leave. And Emily didn't have the heart to make him, and neither did Gutierrez, and neither did a single nurse on that rooftop. So they let him stay. They let him lie there in the noon light with his father's name on his back and 3,000 engines idling below him like a heartbeat, the size of a city. And after a while, one by one, the men began to come up. Gutierrez organized it because somebody had to. 30 years of security work had taught him how to move people without anyone feeling moved. And he set it up like a receiving line at a wedding, a few at a time, up the elevator, out onto the roof, to the side of a dying boy's gurney. And one by one, the most feared men in America came and knelt beside Logan Whitaker and told him about his father. The first was a huge man named Diesel from the Spokane chapter, who had to be 70 years old and moved like every joint in his body had a story. He lowered himself down beside the gurney with a grunt and took the boy's hand in a paw the size of a dinner plate. "Your daddy pulled me out of a ditch in a blizzard in 2009, Diesel said. "Bike went out from under me on black ice 40 miles from anywhere, and I went down in the snow off the side of the road where nobody had ever have seen me. Everybody else rode on. Didn't know I was gone. But your dad, Thunder, he counted heads at the next stop, and he came up one short, and he turned that bike around and rode back 40 miles into a whiteout to find me." The old man shook his head slowly. "Found me half buried and going blue. Wouldn't leave. Sat with me 4 hours in that snow till the truck came, kept me talking, kept me awake, gave me his own jacket." Diesel's voice went rough. "I'd have froze to death that night, son, sure as I'm sitting here. And you know what he said after nothing? Never mentioned it. I tried to thank him a week later, and he looked at me like he didn't know what I was talking about. That's the kind of man he was. Did the thing and never once asked for the credit." Logan held on to that. Emily saw him hold on to it, file it away, another piece of the man he'd never gotten to know. "He gave you his jacket," Logan said, "in a blizzard. He gave you his own, off his own back, rode 40 miles home in a t-shirt." Diesel almost smiled. "Cussed the whole way, I heard, but he did it." A younger man came next, maybe 40, lean and quiet, with a road name patch that read Cross. He'd ridden up from Salt Lake City through the night 9 hours, and his eyes were bloodshot with it. "I never met your dad," Cross said, and he seemed almost ashamed of it. "I was too young, came into the club after. But I'll tell you something, kid. I've heard the name Thunder my whole time in this life. 15 years. The old guys, they don't talk about much. You know how they are. But when they talk about your father, they get this thing in their voice. Like church." He looked down at his own hands. "There's 100 guys in this club who ride harder, who ride meaner, who got more miles and more scars. But there's not one man in this whole thing that the old-timers talk about the way they talk about Thunder. He's the standard. He's the one they measure the rest of us against." Cross lifted his eyes to Logan's. "And I rode 9 hours through the dark to be here because I wanted to be able to tell my own kids someday that I was there, that I saw Thunder's son with my own eyes, that I got to kneel down next to him. You're famous, man. You've been famous in this club since before you could walk, and you never even knew it." That one broke something open in Logan that none of the others had. "I thought I was nobody," the boy whispered. His voice was cracking. "My whole life, Cross. I thought I was nobody. Son of a man who left, just some kid in a small town. And you're telling me all this time, all these years, I thought I was..." "You were never nobody." Cross gripped his hand hard, fierce. "You hear me? Never. You were Thunder's boy. You were somebody in 3,000 men's hearts before you were even born. You just had to come find out. That's all. You just had to come find out who you already were." Logan cried at that, and Cross stayed with him until he could breathe again, and then he pressed his fist to his chest and gave up his place to the next man. They came for hours. Emily lost count somewhere past 30. She stopped trying to hold the names and just watched her son's face as each one handed him another fragment of Daniel, a story, a scar, a laugh, a debt. There was a man named Hollis who'd gotten sober because Thunder sat outside a bar with him for 6 hours one night and wouldn't let him go in. There was a woman, older, silver-haired and hard-eyed, who wasn't a member but was somebody's widow, and who told Logan that Daniel had carried her husband's casket and then quietly paid 3 months of her mortgage and made her swear never to tell. There was a man missing 2 fingers who said Thunder had been the only one to visit him in the hospital every single day after the accident. Each story was a stone laid down on the empty place inside Logan, and Emily watched the empty place fill hour by hour until the boy who'd spent his life not knowing his father knew him better by that golden afternoon than most sons ever know the fathers who raised them. And he drank every drop of it. He got weaker as the hours passed. Emily could see it, the way his voice thinned to a thread, the way his eyes took longer and longer to find each new face. But he would not stop and he would not rest. And every time she leaned down and murmured, "Baby, maybe we should get you back inside now," he'd tighten his grip on her hand and say, "Not yet, Mom. One more. Just one more, please." So she let him have one more, and one more after that, because she understood watching him that he wasn't just collecting stories. He was collecting a father. 18 years of a father all at once in an afternoon, because it was the only afternoon he was ever going to get. Late in the day, when the lights started to go long and gold and the shadows of the mountains reached out across the city, Victor Kane came and knelt by the gurney one last time. He'd hung back all afternoon. Emily had noticed, let the others come, let them each say their piece, keeping his own counsel the way a president does. But now the line had thinned and the light was failing, and the old man lowered himself down beside the boy with something final in his face. "Son," Victor said, "I got to ask you something, and I need you honest with me. Man to man, brother to brother, none of that being brave for your mama stuff." "Yes, sir." "How you feeling? The truth now." Logan was quiet a long moment. His eyes drifted up to the darkening sky, and when he answered, his voice was soft and unafraid. "Tired, Vic," he said. "I'm real tired." And Emily's heart cracked straight down the middle, because she heard in those 3 words what she'd been refusing to hear all afternoon, that this was it, that the day had spent the very last of him, that the thing he'd held on for had come, and had been more than either of them had ever dared to dream, and now, gently, quietly, the holding on was coming to its end. Victor heard it too. She watched him hear it, watched the knowledge settle over that scarred old face. The old man took the boy's hand in both of his. "Then I'm going to tell you the last thing," Victor said. "The thing I've been saving. And then I want you to rest, son, because Lord knows you earned it. You earned it more than any man I ever rode with." He leaned in close, his voice dropping. "You want to know the real reason we retired your daddy's name? The whole reason nobody's ridden as Thunder in 12 years. You said because he died with honor. Because there was nobody worthy to carry it. That's part of it. That's the part I tell everybody." Victor's voice went lower still until it was almost nothing, until Emily had to lean in to catch it. "But there's more. There's a part I never told a living soul. The night your daddy died, the very last thing he said, after he threw Pete his keys, after he told him to ride, after he said, 'Tell my boy his dad wasn't scared,' the very last words out of Daniel Whitaker's mouth, Pete carried to me, and I have carried them 12 years, and I swear to you, I never once knew what to do with them until this exact moment kneeling here." The whole rooftop had gone still. Even the idling engines below seemed to hold their breath. "What did he say?" Logan whispered. Victor's eyes were streaming now, this hard old man, this president, who by his own account had never wept at a single brother's funeral, weeping openly on a rooftop in the last gold light of day. He said, "Tell them to hold my name." Victor's voice shattered on the words. That's it. That's what he used his last breath on. Bleeding out behind a truck with the whole world coming apart around him, dying, and Daniel Whitaker spent his last words to say, "Tell them to hold my name." The old man pressed the boy's hand against his own scarred chest. "And we didn't understand it, son. 12 years we turned it over, and we didn't understand. We thought he meant honor it, retire it, let it lie down and rest with him. So that's what we did. We held it out of respect, and we figured that was what he wanted. But that's not what he meant," Logan breathed. "No." Victor shook his gray head, tears falling. "No, son, that's not what he meant. I know that now. I know it like I know my own name. He didn't mean retire it. He meant hold it, keep it, guard it, save it. Don't let it die, because somewhere out there, I got a little boy, and someday that boy is going to come looking for his daddy, and when he does," Victor's whole body shook. "When he does, that name is his. It's waiting for him. It belongs to him." Emily pressed both hands over her mouth. "Your father knew Logan." The old man's voice was fierce now, urgent, like he had to make the boy understand before the light was gone. Somehow in that last second, dying in the dirt, he knew. He didn't say, hold my name out of pride. He didn't say it because he wanted to be remembered. He said it because he had a son at home, a little boy on a gas tank, and he wanted, with the very last thing he had to leave that boy, something. Something that couldn't be taken away. Something that couldn't be lied about. Something that would sit and wait no matter how many years went by until his son was ready to come and claim it. Victor's voice broke completely. He was thinking about you, son. In the last second of his life, with a war breaking loose all around him, your daddy wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about his boy. He held that name for you across 12 years and death itself. And the old man could barely get it out. You were brave enough to come and reach back for it. Logan Whitaker closed his eyes, and he smiled, and the tears ran down his hollow cheeks and into the leather collar of his father's colors, and he said so soft that only Victor and Emily in all the world could hear it. I found him. I actually found him. Mom. His eyes came open and found her face. I found Dad. You found him, baby, Emily wept. You found him. He was waiting the whole time. He left it for me, and he waited the whole time. The whole time. I'm not the son of a bad man. Logan turned his head slowly and looked out over the edge of the roof, out at the 3,000 men below and the gold light dying on the mountains beyond them. I'm the son of thunder, and I got to wear his name. I got to hear who he really was from the men who loved him. I got his voice thinned to almost nothing. Mom, I got everything. I got the whole thing. There's nothing left I need. There's not one single thing left in this world that I need. He turned back to her, and his eyes were clear and easy and completely finally at peace. And I'm not scared anymore, he said. Isn't that something? All this time, all these months, I was so scared, Mom. Every night, and now wonder came into his wrecked voice. Now I'm not even a little. He took it. Dad reached out and took the scared away. I can't even find it anymore. I've been looking for it, and it's just gone. Emily gathered her son up into her arms, careful over the tubes and the leather, and she held him against her chest exactly the way she'd held him the day he was born. 18 years and a lifetime ago, when a big, frightening man had cried so hard over his newborn son that the delivery nurse had asked him if he needed to sit down. She held him like that, and she rocked him, and over his shoulder she looked at Victor Kane, and no words passed between them, but everything did. They took him back inside as the sun went down. He asked to keep the vest on, and there was not a person alive who could have told him no. They wheeled him back down through the hushed corridors to his room, and the men filed down behind him, silent and honor guard 4 floors long. And the 3,000 engines in the streets below did not leave. That was the thing Emily would never forget. The thing she'd tell for the rest of her life. They didn't leave. All evening, all night. They stayed a rumbling vigil in the dark streets around the hospital, so that every time Logan surfaced from sleep in the hours that followed, the first thing that reached him was that low rolling thunder, and he would smile without ever opening his eyes and sink back down into rest, knowing his father's family was still out there in the dark, still keeping watch, still holding the line for Thunder's boy. Pete stayed in the room all night. Emily didn't ask him to. He just pulled a chair into the corner and sat cap in his hands and stayed. So did Victor. So did Raven, filling the far corner like a mountain that had decided to grow up out of the floor, silent, unmoving present. Brothers keeping vigil for a brother's son, the way brothers do, the way they'd have done for Daniel himself if the world 12 years ago had ever given them the chance. Sometime past 3 in the morning, Logan woke and asked for his mother, and Emily leaned in close. I'm here, baby. Will you tell me the gas tank won? He murmured. One more time, the rumble and the hiccups. So she told him one last time about the 2-year-old boy on the gas tank of his father's Harley, idling up and down a gravel driveway that went nowhere, laughing so hard he got the hiccups, held safe the whole time by 2 enormous arms. And somewhere in the middle of it, with the distant thunder rolling up from the streets, and his father's name across his shoulders, and his mother's voice in his ear, Logan Whitaker's breathing went slow and slower and gentle and easy. He died at 4:47 in the morning, with the first gray light coming in around the edges of the blinds, and his mother's hand in his, and his father's name across his back, and the low endless thunder of 3,000 idling engines still rolling up from the streets below to carry him out. He was not afraid. He was not alone. And he did not at the last die feeling forgotten. He died knowing exactly who he was, and exactly whose he was, and exactly finally where he belonged. When Emily lifted her head at last from her son's still chest, she found Victor Kane standing at the foot of the bed with his fist against his heart and his gray head bowed low, and behind him Pete and Raven, and every last man who'd stayed the night, all of them in that same posture of grief and honor. And outside the window, as the news somehow traveled down to the waiting men in the streets, a nurse's face at a window, a look, a bowed head. No words needed, the engines began to roar. One last time, 3,000 strong, a thunder to shake the walls of the building and rattle the dark glass and carry the boy home. The funeral 4 days later was unlike anything the state of Montana had ever seen or has seen since. They came from 12 states in the end. Word had kept traveling chapter to chapter, highway to highway, and by the morning they laid him to rest. The procession stretched 11 miles down the interstate. Traffic stopped in both directions, not because anyone made it stop, not because there was any law or any barricade, but because there was nothing else a person could do but pull over and take off their hat and watch a river of leather and chrome and thunder carry a boy to his rest. People came out of their houses along the route. Old men stood at attention in their yards. Children waved, and at the front of it all rode Victor Kane, and beside him rode Pete, and between the two of them, carried on a rig they'd welded together through a sleepless night, rode the casket of Logan Thunder Whitaker in his colors going home. Because that was the last thing Victor Kane did, and the thing Emily could never speak of afterward without her voice giving way. Daniel Whitaker had never had a real grave. There had been nothing to bury back then, and no safe way to mark it, even if there had been a hero's grave, was a target same as a hero's family. So for 12 years, Thunder had lain in an unmarked plot under a stranger's silence, under the same lie that had followed him into every corner of his son's life. But in the 4 days between Logan's death and his burial, Victor Kane moved heaven and earth. He called in favors 12 years old. He had a stone cut. He had it set. And when they lowered Logan into the ground that afternoon, it was not into a lonely plot, but into a double grave side by side with his father beneath 2 stones that finally at long last told the whole world the truth. The father's stone read, Daniel Thunder Whitaker. He held the line so others could ride home. A soldier, a brother, a father not forgotten. And the son set right beside it, close enough to touch, read, Logan Thunder Whitaker. He was brave enough to go looking for the truth. He carried the name home. The same name. Father and son. Reunited under an enormous Montana sky, laid down side by side at last with 3,000 engines thundering them both into whatever comes after. Emily stood between the 2 graves as the sun went down over the mountains, and she was not alone, and she would never be alone again, because Pete stood on one side of her with his arm around her shoulders, and Victor stood on the other and ranged out behind her, quiet and steady. In the failing light stood a family she had feared her entire adult life and would love with her whole heart for the rest of it. And she thought about the wall. 12 years she'd built it, brick by careful brick, the toolbox on the high shelf, the tight smile, the changed subject. Your dad was trouble, baby, and that's the last we're going to talk about it. She'd built it to keep her son safe, and she'd believed right up until the rain and the steel door and the warm room full of ghosts that safe was the same thing as loved. She'd had the wrong word the whole time, and her boy had known it. That was the thing that would stay with her until her own last breath that Logan had known. Some deep, stubborn, unkillable part of that child had always known that trouble was a lie, that it didn't fit, that no matter how many times the world said it about the man in the faded photograph, it was wrong. That was why he asked. That was why, dying out of every wish a boy could make in all the world, he'd asked for nothing but the truth, because some part of him would not go down into the dark, still carrying a lie about the man who'd made him and loved him and left him a name to find. And he hadn't. In the end, he hadn't carried the lie 1 inch further. He'd gone into the dark carrying the truth instead, and his father's name across his shoulders, and the love of 3,000 men, and he'd gone unafraid because his father had reached across 12 years and death itself to take the fear away. Sometimes the people the whole world teaches you to fear are the very ones who never once forgot what loyalty means. Sometimes the men in the leather, the ones the hospital said no to, the ones the frightened mother drove through the storm to face the ones a whole town crosses the street to avoid, are the ones who will ride through the night from 12 states away to make certain a dying boy knows beyond any doubt that he was known and claimed and loved and never for one single day forgotten. Logan Whitaker asked for one impossible thing, and the men everyone feared gave him what no one else on this earth could have given him. They gave him back his father. They gave him his name. And they gave him a way to leave this world not as a sick boy in a bed who never got to do anything but as Thunder's son, brave to the very last breath, riding home at last on a river of engines that shook the mountains and did not stop, would not stop, until he was safe in the ground beside the father who had been waiting for him, holding his name all along. He went looking for the truth, and he found it. He carried the name home. And nothing in this world, not death, not 12 years of silence, not every lie the world could tell about a good man, nothing ever took it from him again.